everyone. Great to see you all.
Hi, Lizette.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Lucia, do you mind just showing a little bit how much, like, the people that, like, there's an arrow on the right so we can see also. So we have 33 people from different countries. Hello.
Where is everyone?
I think we know.
Hola.
From Peru, US, UK.
India.
Bangalore, Maria Clara.
Nigeria.
Nigeria. Hey, this is so wonderful, guys. Welcome.
They see us?
Yes. Can you see us?
Oh, there you are. Yes,
we are
Yes, we
here.
can.
Get a box too. Okay. Even a name. That's great.
Yeah. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. It's just wonderful to have. This is Dan. We're launching our series on new leadership.
Oh,
It's a keyword.
wow. Fantastic.
Yeah, and you're like the first person, the first thought leader here. And,
Wow, what an honor.
beautiful soul to help us explore the topic of awareness and how leadership and well-being, and particularly in our work of creating, unleashing, igniting system change. And when Ashoka started, we were very much pioneering the word like social entrepreneurs and system change. And we started selecting social entrepreneurs who were addressing social pressing issues with a solution, right? And then through the time, for these past 38 years, our work has evolved a lot. And now we're not talking about social change only, but we're talking about framework change. And framework change means, mindset change. And it's so many things that are really getting us all as an organization in an exploration of what does leadership mean? Is that inner work connected to our outer doing? Is our ability to see complex systems? Is our ability to sense that interdependence in the world, and so on? And so there are so many new things that we're discovering. So hopefully we'll have a great experience now welcoming Dan. You all have his bio, so I'm not gonna repeat it because I don't wanna take so much time there. But what I would love, Dan, for you to do is just to share a little bit about your journey and insights around, awareness, interpersonal biology, what that means, the mindset process, and just, we will have questions from the people mainly around well-being and leadership and how that can help us. And I don't know if we will have time, ideally we will, to learn a little bit about the wheel of awareness and how we can use it in our day-to-day.
Yeah.
But like ideally we will get out of here with saying we have some tool for my day-to-day to at least feel that I can connect with my well-being as a leader.
Yeah, exactly. And we go on for 5-6 hours.
No, I think this is a lifetime work.
And I hope you brought your tent.
Yes, exactly. But for questions, feel free to use the chat, and Lucia will be reading them to us.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all, to speak for this, what is it called? Your new series? What's this?
The series on new leadership.
New leadership for Ashoka. That's great. I'm very honored. So I'll just start with a couple of things in terms of the questions you're asking about. I think one of the reasons it's important, I think, for social entrepreneurs and change makers to consider some of the ideas we're about to talk about is because we all come as individuals into our lives. And yet for some of us who are devoted to being of service to what's called others, and I don't really like those words, so I'm going to put quotes around it when we do, there's a risk of actually not doing the internal work to avoid burnout. So the first thing just to say is that there's a kind of a very powerful way of understanding kind of resilience training that requires inner work, which is the notion of awareness that you're talking about. So we'll come back to that. That's just a touch on the question you would ask. And the way we'll try to look at that because you asked about the interpersonal neurobiology processes, I'll just give you a very, very brief overview. But this field, interpersonal neurobiology, is a way of taking all the different disciplines of science, and maybe we should switch chairs, because that way I'm kind of looking at you and everyone in the camera. Otherwise, I feel like I'm like going. Is that okay?
Absolutely, sir.
Okay. There we go. Okay. So, oh yeah, that's fine. Great. So now I can go like that. The camera see everybody. So the idea then is, you know, that what would happen if you took all the fields of science, so math, physics, chemistry, biology, psychology, linguistics, geology, anthropology, everything in between, and just put them into a framework. So this is something I just got very interested in the early 90s for lots of different reasons that I write about in a book called Mind. And essentially it was because I felt very frustrated being trained as a physician and a psychiatrist with what I was being taught or not taught about what the mind was and what the health was. So that incredible despair, really, I thought about dropping out of the field altogether, because it just, you had a field of mental health that never defined the mental or the health, believe it or not. And so I just felt essentially unprepared to be working with people. And then I was asked to be the training director of child psychiatry and adolescent psychiatry at UCLA. And I felt unprepared to really teach the next generation of people working with the mental health of children and adolescents when no one told me what mental health was. So that led to this journey in 1991 to really ask, what is the mind? What is a healthy mind? And how do you cultivate a healthy mind? Those 3 questions. So everything since then, I don't know how many years that's been now. I don't even want to do the numbers, but it's a lot of years, many decades, you know, has been to work by bringing all the sciences together in this thing that came to be called interpersonal neurobiology. Now I've edited books from other people in a series by that name. We have about, I think, 7 books. The whole solid library, if you want to read about that. And then the field, IPNB is how you abbreviate it, can be, do you want me to move closer to that?
I don't know. They're saying that they're hearing a little bit low, so that's why I'm trying to move it, but there's
Just get closer.
limitations to
Yeah, well, I'll move the wires around and I'll move this body around. And is that good?
Yes.
You want to move that over even? Like on
I
a
don't
different
know
chair?
if I can.
Is this being used for something?
Yes, yes.
Oh, that's for you guys?
It's for you. You're also there.
Oh,
I'm
in this
not
camera?
yeah.
Am I off camera now? There we go. Oh, so maybe that's not so good for them. Okay, so anyway, so the idea then is there are certain principles that come up from IPNB that allow us to address certain issues of individual resilience, how couples work, how families work, how a classroom works, how a school would work, how an organization might work, how a community might work, how a nation might work, and even looking at issues of planetary health. So IPNB has been used. So for example, in the conference we're having for our annual conference next month, you know, we're going to address all of these issues, looking at indigenous cultures and their approach to how we relate to nature, to looking at contemplative practices of inner awareness training, to looking at issues of medical health that emerge or don't emerge based on awareness, what the mind is doing, and then looking at what spirituality and religion have to play in all that stuff, and then looking at the system of information that the internet is creating, and then looking at planetary health. So I can name all the people doing all those things, but we have people who are expert in each of those areas I just mentioned will be there to try to have a common conversation to think about awareness-based systems change, so that you look at a process that you would say is a part of the mind, and how it influences everything we do to try to create positive change in the world. So that's the broad view of interpersonal neurobiology. That was one of your questions.
I actually just all of a sudden want to ask,
Yeah.
what is awareness?
So what is awareness? So, you know, the big topic for anyone interested in the mind is about consciousness and what that is. And some people use the word consciousness and awareness, those two words, as synonyms. Some people don't. But awareness would be the experience of knowing. And I don't mean knowledge, but I mean, if I say hello, how many of you know I said hello? Okay, so that's awareness. It's the subjective experience of knowing. That's the simplest way of defining awareness. Consciousness would be both the knowing, the awareness, and the known, hello. So hello would be the item that is within consciousness, or the known of consciousness, what you're aware of, and the knowing would be the awareness itself. So we put this in a wheel where the hub of the wheel is the knowing, the rim of the wheel are the knowns, and then we do something called integrating consciousness. Integration is allowing things to be different and honoring those differences, but then linking them. So integration, that word, is defined as the linkage of differentiated parts. And whether you're looking at the mind and its subjective experience of knowing and the knowns, and differentiating those two from each other, you can integrate consciousness with amazing changes that happen in a person's life. And many people don't have integrated consciousness. They get lost in the knowns and don't distinguish it from the knowing. And so if they have a thought, they think it's a reality, or I'm not going to go on a political rant about that, but
You're in the right place.
you know, there is something called truth, and it isn't necessarily the same thing as your impulse or your thought or your whatever. Anyway, so so there are lots of people, unfortunately, in the world who have unintegrated consciousness. And when a system like the system of consciousness, or the system of the brain, or the system of the body, or the system of a group don't have integration, then what unfolds is either chaos or rigidity. So it's like, and I can draw on that pad if you want me to do it. I can either do it here, or the pad if we can try it. And we'll see. So basically, if you imagine a river, the central flow of the river, let's say, is the central flow of integration. When you're outside of that flow, you either go to a bank of chaos or a bank of rigidity. It's quite amazing, but systems that are called complex systems.
Yeah, sorry.
Oh, it's that thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, systems that are called complex systems, which have certain mathematical characteristics to them. I think we just lost our friends.
It's because you're going to get into the back and our friends are on the left, on the
Oh,
right
great.
side.
So complex systems have a number of features, but one of them is called self-organization. And it turns out that optimal self-organization has the qualities that spell the word. Is it ready to write?
Should be, yeah.
Yeah, so let's see, I'm not a good.
Oh, that's the eraser. You need to do the squiggly one.
So draw. Okay, here, you're gonna see why I didn't go to art school. So if you imagine a river, on one bank outside of the river is chaos. The other bank is rigidity. And chaos basically is where things are completely unpredictable, random, sometimes intrusive. Rigidity is completely predictable and unchanging. And the center flow is the flow of integration, which is basically harmony. And this harmony has, I don't know if we can make a new page. Is there a way to do that?
I haven't played around with that. I'll put it.
Save it. Yeah, maybe. Save. Anyway, I want to go on to do other things, but But I don't want to erase that. Do we have to erase that?
Hopefully not. Let's see what we can do here. Can you scroll down a bit?
Oh, maybe. Yeah, make it like an infinite whiteboard.
That would be lovely. It doesn't
And now it's erasing it. Okay. Well, anyway, you can see that. Maybe you can play with that. Yeah. See. So you have this chaos and rigidity, and it's just a way to think about going into a system like a community. If there's a lot of chaos or rigidity, it means there's impaired integration. And integration is harmony, and it has 5 qualities that spell the word faces. It's flexible. F, it's adaptive. A, it's coherent, meaning it holds well over time or resilient. C, it's coherent. E is energized, and S is stable. So flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, and stable is kind of this way of mathematically defining what integration creates. So that's the bottom line. So in terms of, is that your question about awareness, the reason awareness is important is because if someone doesn't have integrated consciousness, they'll be much more prone to chaos and rigidity in their life, which is basically the basis of burnout. You know.
So I found it out.
Okay.
It's that little chat in the corner.
This one?
In the corner, it'll do a new page.
To the next page.
Yeah.
Right. So this faces flow is what we want to look for in a system. You know, so it's flexible, adaptive, and coherent, which is resilient, energized, so you feel I love going to work or I love working here, and stable, not a rigid kind of stable. This would be. So this is the faces flow you want to see in the system. Anyway, so the reason awareness-based system change is important is because some things can happen, like, for example, in your own individual growth in a family that can lead to impaired integration. And so we would look at the individual level of things. You could see impaired integration in a school, right? Where a child feels not empowered to be a learner. You could see impaired integration in a community or a society where people are disenfranchised and hugely differentiated and not linked into their community. You can see, you know, for example, this year is 2019 in the United States. It's 400 years since the first slave ship arrived from Africa. And so we have this process of incredible disempowerment of African Americans here in the United States, which is an example of impaired integration. And the word integration has its own connotation in the US where people think of busing and, you know, a system that didn't really work well. But anyway, so all of that stuff has to do with this word mind, which we could talk about in a moment. Because this word, in many ways, would be what some people would say is the origin of this word, which is your experience of self. And so what I would ask you all about, everyone, is like, what is the mind? And what is the self that it gives rise to? So I can offer you, after we have a discussion, the IPNB view of that, but what are some of your thoughts about that? And also anyone, anywhere on the planet can respond to that too.
So as far as self, I think it has to do with like the narrative of like you and like who you like. This is a deep. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me? Okay.
Thumbs up if you can hear.
I don't really like shouting, but I can shout if I need to. I never know how loud my voice is. I either talk way too loud or too quiet.
You can try. We'll give you feedback.
Okay. So I guess self is like the buildup of like narratives that you tell yourself about yourself, or that other people tell you, or like, oh yes, you're very blank, you're this, or like, things you've done that define you. Like, I'm a teacher, I'm a this, I'm a that, I worked here, I lived here, I'm a travel but your personality and your emotions too.
Okay, so what you're describing is the idea that there's a story, a narrative, and that what some people use as the term a center of narrative gravity, right? Where there's a locus through which you live your life either with identity or emotions or memory, and that all these things are located somewhere. And that's what we might call the self, right? And all those things, you know, story, meaning, emotion, memory, would be elements of what is traditionally called mental life or the mind. So all that stuff would be a great way to start appealing, like, okay, well, what is the self and what is the mind? It has something to do with all the things you mentioned. Great. Yes?
Is the kind of the mind consciousness in the self when the mind sees itself, or when it understands otherness, that it understands that there's this kind of integrated, there's the kind of origin and there's the difference between itself and what it encounters.
So now you come to a fundamental experience of the idea that, okay, you have all these narrative center of gravities, but now you also have this interesting moment, and I'm going to put a quote around versus self versus other. So you realize that there is a way that kind of follows the following sequence. You have categories that are created, which are presumed divisions in the real world. From those presumed categories, you have concepts, like there's some kind of essence that I would call me, and there's some essence that I would call you, because there are categories in the world of, you know, self and other. But, you know, how do I even relate to this? Well, then the third thing you have categories, concepts. The third thing you get is a symbol, like the word self or the word other. Then you live in a family, or you live in a school, or you live in a community, or you live in a media bath that continues to bathe you in symbols that reinforce the concepts from which the symbol arose and that rigidify the category. So in this particular case, for the second aspect, we're saying that this moment where there's this category, concept, and symbol self, in my case, my parents call me Danny, they've started the whole thing going. There's self and other. And a word that's sometimes used for that is called othering. This is why it's very difficult to speak about the self without talking about the other, just like you're saying, because these are fundamental categories we presume to be in the world, and then the symbols make them as if they're real and we don't question.
I want to see if there are other questions.
Yeah. Any questions from other aspects of ourself that are distributed around Earth? Here's a question.
No, I
Oh,
just,
that's
I just told people, like, you feel free to unmute, or if you also want to type the questions, I'm reading them.
Yeah.
Maybe until somebody, I just have a quick question. And,
Yes.
In the Western world, more like we have this Descartes idea of I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
How correct is that? Because don't you have to be alive first before you can think?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So where does the mind fit into that whole equation? Is it you are and there you think, or you think and therefore you are?
Yeah. So you're asking a question about thought, which of course is a part of the mind. And we should just tease apart the word mind then, because many people use the word mind to mean thinking. So they'll say my mind and my heart, like my thoughts and my feelings. So just so you know, because I'm sitting in this chair, I never use the word mind like that. And unless I'm really like had too much wine or something, I would never say mind and heart, ever, for the way I use mind. So for me, the word mind would include what's called subjective experience, which is kind of what you're saying, that you have a center of sensation of being alive that arises. And you know you're having it by a second thing called consciousness. No thoughts anywhere in any of that. Then you have a third thing that the word mind includes, which is information processing, where you make what are called representations, representations of experience. And that would be what a thought is. Some of them are with words, some of them not with words. You can have thoughts that are in images. All of that is basically energy flow that, in the case of these representations, has symbolic value. So in our point of view, Descartes, was wrong. Just like Damasio has Descartes' error, that thought is way down the line of information processing. But as a philosopher, that would make sense, I think, there for him, because that's what I'm doing myself. I'm thinking a lot. But you have subjective experience way before thinking. And you have awareness without thought. Right?
So we'll, sorry. I just want to finish the thought. But then what defines the self is the mind or is the thought? Like, is there self without thought?
Well, exactly. Well, let me give you an example of how to tease apart the 2 points you're making. One of the speakers at our April conference is a fellow named John Milton. And John Milton is someone who, being part indigenous North American, also has studied indigenous cultures, has something called the Sacred Lands up in Crestone, Colorado. And he takes people on a retreat where you go into the forest for, in this case, it was 3 days without other human beings near you. And in the course of those 3 days, what the 10 of us or so that did individually and then came back, all shared the same kind of experience, which was after about 5 or 6 hours in the forest, at least at this place, your sense of being separate from the trees and the creek and the stones and the sky dissolved.
Mm.
And so the experience of subjective life no longer had a self defined by your skin. And you wouldn't even have a thought, where's myself? It was just, if you had to put words to it, something like being forest or something like that. Not I am the forest, just being forest, more like a verb than a kind of noun you would make. And I had the unfortunate experience where one of the members of our group got a little lonely, and so she left her tent and started trotting along the trail when I was in the middle of my experience. And so she said, hello, like that. And suddenly, within half of a second of her saying hello, my sense of Dan returned. And then, I advised her not to go bother the other people. She went back, and that was fine, sort of. But it was a learning experience for me because it took about another 10 hours to have Dan disappear again and just be forest. So now, as we are having this discussion, what is the self, what is the mind? I wasn't unconscious, so I was very aware. But the skin that encases this body and the bark that encased the trees of the forest felt the same. And so when we got back after the 3 days and had our circle together, there were a lot of tears because the feeling was this all one time was the true reality, and that living in modern society required you have a social security number and a tax identification number and a driver's license and all these things, which kept on putting a name that was an artificial creation of an experience of, quote, self that was actually quite limiting. So Now, all that with the word mind, in our view, mind is an emergent phenomena of energy flow that is both embodied and relational. There's a whole line of reasoning behind that. So that, you know, when you see this word, for us, you know, mind is emerging, which is a mathematical term, emerging from energy and information flow. And so information is a subset of energy with symbolic value, and energy we'll talk about in a moment. But if you said, well, you know, where is this flow happening? You know, this is where we differ from Hippocrates 2,500 years ago and William James in 1890, the father of modern psychology, who said, oh, the mind is just brain activity. And we think the brain is cool and important, but it's not the whole story. And in fact, one way you can consider is that viewing mind as just a synonym for brain activity is not only part of a much larger story, but it's destructive to the point of even being thought of as a lethal lie. Because if you believe your mind only comes from your head, and if you believe the self comes from the mind, which you can see the reasoning why that's probably true, then self only comes from your head. Or maybe to be a little bigger about it, it comes from your skin encased body. And then that's where othering happens. So whether you're looking at indigenous cultures, which see our experience as fundamentally woven from our relationship with nature, or in South Africa, Ubuntu, where you see I am me because you are you. You see this experience of deep acknowledgement of interconnectedness. When we look at this thing here, the mind emerges from energy information flow, and you say, where is it? You say it's in the whole body, so it's embodied, and it's relational. And this, I think, is what interpersonal neurobiology has to offer Ashoka, really, is that what you're doing in social entrepreneurship is allowing the mind to realize its full potential. And what we can do is dive very briefly into what the idea of awareness-based systems change really means when it comes to this notion of the mind being both embodied and relational. And so then what you're doing, working with a community, let's say, or an organization, or the planet, is to really think deeply about what are the properties of well-being that arise from this line of reasoning. So let me just see, before I get into that, if there are any questions.
Yes, so I wanted to share that one of our colleagues here, Anup, has shared a reflection that I want to read out loud.
Please.
So Anup says, self can pertain to the senses of individuality or awareness itself. So there is awareness of self. Oh, sorry. Somebody wrote something else and it disappeared. So there is awareness of self as a subtle thought or intuition, and there is awareness of as self, which is beyond thought and intuition. This is beyond the experience of individuality. We may say it is the field in which all experiences happen, including that of matter, mind, and world.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about that field. That's so beautifully said. And someone else responded to that?
Well, we have a question from Moriel. She
Yep.
says, isn't there a collective worldly component to the mind? It's a river, and in a way, energy from the world can enter our own minds, and we identify it as our truth.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful. You have poets working at Ashoka. Beautiful. Exactly. Exactly. So the field that we're talking about and the way embodied and relational processes can be seen as connected to each other, the thing that they share is energy flow. So energy flow streams throughout your body, including your brain. Energy flow is happening now, right now, with all of us in the room and through the internet. And energy has different forms, and it has these features you can call cliff. It has contours, locations, intensities, frequencies, forms. Form it could take as electrical energy, the energy of sound, air molecules moving, light energy, chemical energy. There's all sorts of forms of energy. But let me ask you to reflect for a moment. What is energy? What actually is it? You understand it has different forms and frequencies and all that stuff. But what is it? Now, this question is not easy. And luckily, and someone says it's source, excellent. So then what is source?
Energy.
Yeah, the activation principle, like the activator.
Excellent. So activation, the source activation, and what's that?
They're from 0 to 1.
From 0 to 1. Beautiful, beautiful. So the way a physics person, a physicist would say 0 to 1 is, and the idea of a source, and this is what physicists say, and I was able to spend a week with 150 physicists, it's the movement. Oops. What happened there?
Is it glitching or?
It just, if I do this, is that going to be bad? It did something. I think it got offline or something happened. Now that's okay, but that's not okay. So I'll just go on. So what they say is that energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. So they wouldn't say exactly 0 to 1, but they say near 0 to 1. So let's think about that phrase from physicists. From possibility to actuality is what energy flow is. What energy flow is. So when I first heard this, it really made me pause because it helped illuminate something we'll describe in just a moment. But I see someone sending a question to Lizette. So why don't we have the question while we're seeing if we can fix.
Yes, so the question is, how much, from Diana, how much of what we are discussing applies to the entire life cycle? And how does this differ over the life cycle of childhood, adolescence, adulthood?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So these are fundamental questions we're discussing in queries that relate across the lifespan. And I write a lot of books about childhood, and a book called The Developing Mind, which looks at these ideas across the lifespan. And so this would be lifespan related, but also probably not even just related to human lifespan, to life on Earth.
And it shifted? Does it shift if you're like a kid, you're an adult, you're more elder?
So when you say the it, what's the it?
What happens in the experience that you're having, and the awareness of it, and the how you exactly what happens.
So why don't we do this? Let's look at this energy thing and see what might shift it, because I think that will actually help quite a bit. And if that doesn't work, I can draw here. We can go old school. So in the Wheel of Awareness practice, these questions that just came up about awareness and what its connection is to self or mind or stuff like that. So in the Wheel of Awareness, you've got a very simple drawing. Let's see if, you'll be able to see. So you have basically, this is a table in my office, but it looks like a wheel. Can you see that okay? Yeah. So imagine that the knowing of awareness is in this hub. Just, it's a metaphor. And then here you have the rim of the wheel. And these are the knowns.
An example of no.
So you can divide the rim into 4 parts, and you'll give me the examples. Let's say we're going to first talk about energy that's outside the body you were born into. So give me one example of how you might have the known of energy coming from outside the body.
Senses.
Senses. So we have the 5 senses, exactly. So you have, hearing, right? That's sound energy, sight, etc. Right? Smell, taste, and touch. Excellent. So that's your first 5 senses. Now we're going to go inside the body. What kind of energy do you have inside the body?
Is it emotions?
So emotions we'll get to in a moment. Emotions we're going to put over here in mental activities. But you're absolutely right that emotions come from bodily sensations. So a feeling of the heart, a feeling of your intestines, a feeling in your lungs, feeling your muscles and bones is the source of what becomes a mental experience of an emotion like sadness. You might say, I have heaviness in my heart. So that we would put here in bodily sensations like heaviness in my heart. Oh, I must be sad. Someone else may have heaviness in the heart and say, I'm grieving. Someone else might say, I have heaviness in my heart. I think I'm angry. So, but it's some kind of emotion. So the mental apparatus, so we'll call these mental processes, we'll put there. But here it's bodily sensations. And in science, we call that the 6th sense, believe it or not. So here's the first 5, right? 5 senses. Outside energy flow. 6th sense is inside the body. So what are the kind of mental processes you might have? Emotions would be one. What else? Books. Thoughts. What else?
Impulses?
Impulses. What else?
Intuition.
Intuition, ideas, beliefs, attitudes, hopes, dreams, longings, desires. All that, just call that mental processes. And because we're doing the numbers, we'll just call this the 7th sense. Your awareness of that, even your sense of self, you could probably put there. And then there's one more sense that we don't usually talk about, which is your sense of connectedness or interconnection. So we'll call that your relational sense. Of interconnection. And so here we'll just call that the 8th sense, just to keep the numbers going. So those are all things you can become aware of. Like right now, with all of us together here in this conversation, just let your awareness, which is the hub, right? So this is the knowing of awareness. This is being aware. Just right now, invite into the hub of your mind the sense of connection to other Ashoka fellows, other Ashoka changemakers, social entrepreneurs. See if you can be aware of that. Did anyone get a feeling of something?
A colleague just sent the link of the wheel.
A link of the wheel, okay, great. Yep, and it's why I love Ashoka. Great, thank you, Vanessa. So this sense is something you can actually develop. So here's what I did. I did this with my patients. They started improving in the chaos and rigidity that they had, whether they were calling it mild to moderate depression or anxiety or trauma or facing death or whatever. They felt better. And then I taught it to my students who are therapists. They started feeling themselves better. Then they started teaching to their clients, their patients. They got better. So then I decided to do it in workshops. And since I'm a scientist, I would take a recorder, and I did it with 10,000 people systematically. And when they took the microphone, I recorded the results. And now we've had over 45,000 people do it in person. And we've had over 1 million people do it from our website. And so we have collected the data from the first 10,000. And the data were quite amazing. And I write about it in the book called Aware. But what I want to focus on for the purposes of our discussion here is, what is awareness? What is awareness? And it gets to the question of how do these things change over time. So we could spend a long time doing this, and I'm doing an entire day on this tomorrow. We have this big conference here in DC. And so I'm talking about this all day. But the fascinating thing with the 10,000 person study is that when people move a metaphoric spoke of attention around, let's change the color. So this spoke of attention can be systematically moved around to different parts of the rim. And after you explore mental activities, you can actually aim the spoke back into itself. Zed did this at our meeting we had in October, or you could just leave the spoke in or just have no spoke. But the idea is to be a hub and hub experience. So I'm going to focus primarily on that just for the sake of time. But when people do that, everyone has a different kind of experience. But the commonality across the planet has been fascinating. People will say the following things. It was empty but full. Time disappeared. I felt the infinite. I felt so much love before in my life I've never felt. I felt connected to everything and everyone. I felt I was a part of eternity. I felt God. I felt incredibly peaceful, bliss, joy. Over and over and over and over again. That wasn't the goal of it. It was just a practice to move this around, bend the spoke around, and finish it up. So what is going on there? What can we try to imagine the hub is? What is awareness?
I had an interesting experience during the Arab Spring. Elizabeth was also there, which is self-organization.
Yeah.
Which is something that I still try and put it in my work, but seeing millions of people self-organize, like the media is telling you there's nothing happening and people are still turning up, and Christians are forming circles around Muslims, men are forming circles around women. But you see these aerial photographs and it's millions of people acting without any, no one's instigating anything, it just happens. Like
Yes.
It's a phenomena that emerges. And when you're part of that, it is timeless, right? It's almost like time, and everything just disappears. And I remember
it's like tightness. What was the word?
Timeless.
Timeless. Yeah,
Yeah.
timeless.
everything just disappears. And I remember the first 18 days of the Arab Spring in Egypt. I remember those feeling like it was forever, and people were cleaning up. I mean, everything just changed. The whole system changed.
Yes.
Country tidied itself up. There was a new mechanism in place.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
So hold that, and we're going to build right into that, because in a way, the natural capacity of energy and as part of a complex system to self-organize is released when you get to that spacious hub place. And we're going to get into that in a big way in just a moment. Yes.
Maybe unrelated question, but what if the concepts of like selfishness and selflessness, does that fit into here anywhere? Like, and what?
Yeah, so everyone can hear it. So does the concept of selfishness and selflessness fit in? And we're going to get to that in a moment too. Absolutely, because these two things resonate with what's going on. Any questions from out there
Did
so far?
anyone answer what hub is?
No, we don't have.
Yeah, well, it's very hard. What you want to do, ideally, is, do the wheel of awareness as a practice. It's a practice I do every day. And you do it as a meditation, basically. And you can do it from my website. We stream it for free to people.
We do have a question
Yes.
that just came in from Steph. She's saying, could you talk a bit about several cases in which these don't meet? The eighth sense, there is eighth sense, but it does not inform the other senses as much. For example, an organization with an amazing discourse of interconnection, but incoherent practice in the way it operates and how people relate to one another.
Yeah, you mean so that when, even though it's an organization trying to do social good, within the organization, people are not nice to each other? Is that what she means?
That's a question for you.
Because that, you see that a lot, unfortunately. I don't know if that's,
Yes.
yes.
She said
Yeah.
kind of, yes.
Yeah, so let's get into this and let's see if that fits into it. But let's do a little so, you know, this is, you know, what I'm about to describe to you, I took 100 pages in a book with my daughter's assistance as an artist to exemplify. And now we only have, what, 5 minutes to do this? So this is really not fair to you or the ideas or anything.
Or to you.
That's what we have.
But thank you.
But let's go back to the statement, energy is the movement from possibility to actuality. Okay? That if the initial proposal is correct, that mind, whether it's the mind in that organization or the Arab Spring or the idea of selflessness or selfishness, that's all stuff related to mind somehow. And we've said, could it be that mind is an emergent phenomena of energy that's both embodied, including the brain, so we're not getting rid of the brain, we're just saying it's a much bigger picture than that, and the relationality of energy flow, that's the proposal. So if that's true, and if the physicists are right, energy is the movement from possibility to actuality, then you could actually map this out so that if we talk about the 0 to 1 idea, that if I have, call this near zero, physicists don't like to use the word zero, but near zero, if we have a million words I'm going to that we share in common, a million words, I'm thinking one of those words, what's your chance of knowing the word I'm about to say? It's very small. It's 1 out of a million. So it's near zero. So we'll put that way down here. So that's near zero. And then if I say ocean, that rises up here, right? And so what's your chance of knowing I said ocean after I said ocean? 100%.
99.
So 100%. So this goes from near zero to 100, basically. And this is called a probability distribution curve, okay? So it goes from basically near zero to 100%. Now let's say, I'm only gonna say one of the 5 oceans in the world, right? So what's your chance of knowing whether I'm gonna say Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, Atlantic Ocean, whatever? 20%.
20%.
Exactly, 1 out of, so there we would make it, you know, over here, it would be only from here. And ultimately we could make a circle. I'm not gonna draw it, but you could make this like a plane where this line would be diversity. And so you would have this line, this x-axis going across is called time or change. This is the y-axis that goes up and down. This is your z-axis. But basically you could have a little plateau here where this number would be at the 20% range and only 5 basically peaks could arise from there. So here you'd have a peak arising straight from here, 1 out of a million, goes straight up to a peak, but this is a peak. And this we're going to call, so these things at the top, when possible has become actual, we're going to use the word peak. When you've made a certain limited number, like 1 out of 5, that thing there, we're going to call that a plateau. See how it looks like a plateau? Plateau. And then this thing down here, right, when you do the drawing, this is kind of like a plane. See how it looks like a plane? We call that the plane. So this diagram I'm drawing right now, because there's peaks, plateaus, and plane, we're going to call it the 3P diagram, okay? Now, here's what the 10,000 person study invites us to consider as a possibility. This possibility may be completely wrong, So it's just a guess. It could be partially right. It could be completely right. But here's what the proposal is. The mind, as an emergent phenomena of energy flow, has the following features. Energy flow doesn't just mean from this body to the body you were born into. It means the movement along a probability distribution axis. So that this peak would be a thought or an emotion or a memory. The process of thinking, of emoting and remembering would be a value about right here. And an intention or mood or idea or belief would be a plateau. And now I want you to go back to, what did people say their experience of pure hubness was? What did it mean to drop into pure awareness, to be aware of awareness? Do you remember what we said they said? What did people say? Bliss, God, peace,
Being part of eternity.
being part of eternity. So here's what I want you to think about. If the rim are all the knowns, like correlating with peaks and plateaus, what is the hub in this graph?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yeah. So if it's true that the mind, which includes subjective experience and consciousness and information processing and self-organization, those are 4 facets of the mind. If they're all emergent phenomena of energy flow, and this is how you map energy flow, where does consciousness correlate in terms of energy? Well, the peak is what you're conscious of, absolutely. So the knowns of consciousness would be a peak, for example. You know there's a thought. You know you have a heaviness in your heart. Those are when possibles have become actuals. But think about when people said, when I get into the hub, pure awareness, not the rim where you would have what you're conscious of, but now just pure awareness. We don't usually think about this, but pure awareness, they go, it's empty but full. It was reaching on to eternity. Time disappeared.
Except at the zero and at
The near zero plane of possibility. So this plane of possibility in this proposal is the source of consciousness. It's the source of awareness. And the plane of possibility is empty of form, but full of formlessness. In mathematics, what we say is that this is the quantum vacuum. This is the mathematical space with which all possibilities rest before they become actualized either into probabilities or actualities. So while it's called near zero, it's empty of form, it's full of possibility. So while it is filled with uncertainty, it's actually where freedom and possibility rest. So in the Arab Spring, our proposal would be, people were dropping out of their plateaus of separate selfhood, peaks of particular thoughts, and dropped into the source of consciousness. And that self-organization can naturally arise, allowing integration to come forward. And integration made visible is kindness and compassion. And when people drop out of the idea of separateness, literally, the category, the concept, and the symbol are all peaks and plateaus. When you drop beneath them and you give people this situation like Arab Spring, or even the idea of selfishness versus selflessness, you drop into the plane of possibility, like when I was in the forest, there is happening, but I'm not lost in a peak that says this is Dan. There's incredible awareness. I'm not unconscious. I'm unbelievably aware, but until that colleague of mine came over and said, hello, you know, there was just being forced. So for being a social entrepreneur, how is this helpful? If this is true, what it means is if you do the Wheel of Awareness practice, you will develop your access to the plane of possibility. And now, having done this with 45,000 people in person, and tomorrow I'll do another 550 in the room, and I don't include this in the study anymore because it's just too big. I mean, not the study, but the number of people in the room. You know, what people start saying is, I'm a different person when I do the wheel. Why is that the case? Because when you drop people into this plane of possibility and allow them to not just live in the plane, but live from the plane, there's something that I just talked to, were any of you at Wisdom Conference you just had? Were you in the room when I did the keynote address at the end? I don't know if you were there.
No, I saw it online.
You saw it online? Okay, so there are 3,000 people in the room. And I just wanted to see how many of these techies from Silicon Valley knew which is a scientific fact. And only about a dozen in 3,000 raised their hand. So I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands or not, because these are like the science nerds, and they didn't know either. But what I said to them was, how many of you know the physics fact that one reality we live in has two realms? Dozen people raise their hand, that's it. So what are those two realms? Well, the month before my book Aware came out, which was talking about these realms, and I was so nervous because I thought people would think this was dumb because I'm talking about physics and the mind. That's kind of weird anyway. But the month before, on the cover of Scientific American, a very conservative public scientific journal, was bridging the divide between the quantum realm and the Newtonian classical realm. And what does that mean? That means in science, we know as an accepted reality, not as some weird hypothesis, but that when you have condensed energy, like this chair or your body, E equals mc squared, mass is condensed energy. And when you have these macro states, the macro state world was studied by Isaac Newton 350 years ago, and Newton came up with these laws that basically show, in the way the laws operate, that there are separate entities that are like nouns. So there's a planet here, a moon there, a body here, a car there, a chair here. These are like noun-like entities that are separated in space and time. But 100 years ago, almost now, quantum physics developed to study microstates. And the Newtonian, what are also called classical physics laws of macrostates, do not apply at all to microstates. The plane of possibility is a quantum state. And what do we know? We know that things in the quantum realm, just like any of you go swimming? Any of you swim? You know how you do the breaststroke and sometimes you're underwater and sometimes you're coming up for air? There's an air realm and a water realm. You don't freak out that there's an air realm and a water realm and just get really upset. You say, there's an air realm and a water realm. That's it. Here, there's a quantum realm of micro reality and a Newtonian realm of macro reality. What's in the macro world are noun-like entities that have separate qualities to them, at least on their appearance, and there's something called an arrow of time, which is a directionality of change. If we crack an egg, we can't uncrack it. In the microstate world, things are not nouns, they're verbs. They're events, not entities, and they're deeply interconnected. That's been proven, especially in terms of space. Things are absolutely interconnected. We won't get into the whole time issue. Because in the microstate world of the quantum realm, there is no arrow of time. There's no directionality of change, none. It isn't exactly the same as eternity, but it has the quality of eternity. And it may be eternity. So when you look at the 10,000 person study, it correlates with the notion that when you enter the hub of the wheel of awareness, you are giving yourself permission to have the quantum realm of the mind and of the world you live in available to you. And when people do that, to come to the question about selflessness and selfishness, or the question about the eighth sense, is people start to feel the reality of our interconnectedness. And they may look at people in their Newtonian classical macrostate bodies, but because they've tapped into the plane of possibility, they know there's deep interconnection. They know the love emerges. So that I was doing this in a parliament in another country, and people took the microphone, they shared what their experience was, and at the snack break, one of the parliamentarians came up to me and said, "You know, I didn't share during the break time." And I go, "You know, I saw that." He goes, "Do you want to know why?" And I said, "Sure, I'd like to know why." And then this very brusque kind of guy gets really quiet. He starts to cry. He looks me right in the eyes and he says, "You know the part when you bend the spoke around right into the hub?" And I go, "Yeah, I know that part." And he goes, "I have never in my life felt so much love before, so much connection to everyone." Now he's crying. So there's silence between the two of us. So I said to him, "So you felt love?" He goes, "So much love. Never felt so much love." I said, "But you didn't want to share that with other people?" No. He points over to the other parliamentarians. He goes, "They would think I was weak. And I don't want to look weak." And there's a silence. So I said, "Okay, I get it. You didn't want to look weak." He goes, No. So you didn't say anything? No. Now there's this silence. And I look at him, I said, "So let me ask you a question." He goes, "Okay." I said, "So when you're making federal law, when you're setting up national policies, are you leaving love out of your reasoning?" And then his eyes get really, really big, and he starts waving his fingers at me, and then he runs over to his parliamentarians, and I don't know what they said, but he talked a lot with them. We would only hope that this kind of experience of the wheel of awareness practice, just one time for this guy, would tap you into what the plane of possibility gives rise to. Why, I don't know, but three things seem to rise together: awareness, interconnection, and love seem to be the same thing. So in the Arab Spring, you drop into that spaciousness and love naturally arises. The big question becomes, what keeps us from living that way? Well, we have constructed plateaus of self and othering. We have particular peaks. So these plateaus are consciousness filters. They filter consciousness and who you think you are. So you come to believe that you are a noun profoundly separated from others, and your job is to get as much noun-like stuff in your life, and you live a noun-like life instead of dropping into the deeper foundational reality of the deeply interconnected nature of being. And when people start to do that, it isn't that you give up the plateaus and peaks, it's that you free them up. You free them up to allow love, compassion, kindness to be realized as the strongest ways, not the weakest ways, the strongest ways of living. So when we talk about awareness-based systems change, or thinking about being a change maker, or thinking about social entrepreneurship, the win-win-win thing about this discussion is that we have the opportunity to realize that if you do something like the Wheel of Awareness practice, for all the reasons that the science of that show in the book Aware, it actually will build your individual resilience to be able to maintain love and kindness and compassion without burning out. That's what the research, not so much on the wheel, but things that the wheel is constructed of, show. So that's cool. It builds resilience. Number two, you now have a scientific framework to understand what does it really mean to be a change maker? What do you really face in trying to help systems change? Well, part of what this suggests, this diagram, this 3P framework, is that awareness-based systems change is where the work you're doing encourages people to access this plane of possibility. How? There's lots of ways of doing it, but one way to do it is with the wheel of awareness practice. The hub becomes your ally. And when people are just lost on the rim, fighting with each other, being different, before the Arab Spring, what it was like, all these things that we then return back to, we come back like a piece of plastic that bends back to what it was. That's what we need to deal with, are these social constructions of separateness in the Newtonian realm that people have such a fixed hold that is the way reality is. And so this is what becomes really, from a science point of view, fascinating about Ashoka, is that in a way, if you look at the quote from Bill out on the front place about what our job is to do is bring love into the world or whatever. That
Love and respect in action.
Love and respect in action. Yeah, that, you know, your strength of that from a scientific point of view is to see that you're releasing the natural self-organizational push to allow integration to arise. That's what love and respect are. Literally. Love and respect are integration made visible in action. What is integration? The natural push of a complex system to self-organize. What gets in the way? These plateaus that restrict us with beliefs of a separate self. What can liberate us from that? Awareness-based practices that get you beneath the plateaus to not just think about or read a book about or have a poem about, which are cool, all those things are fine, but to have people have a direct experience in a perceptual shift, which is the basis of insight and transformation. So when we say the phrase awareness-based system change, it sounds kind of cool, yeah, awareness, but this is the mechanism. Because if people in a system continually bounce back, and this gets to the question that was asked about systems where people are mean to each other, even though their title is we're social entrepreneurs, is because people haven't done the work. Or you see mindfulness teachers who are incredibly unethical and mean to people and abusive because they're doing a spiritual bypass. You can pretend to be all sorts of things, but when you meet someone who's living from the plane of possibility, there's no pretending there. And this is something everyone can be doing, because when we were talking with Bill earlier, this notion of being a change maker allows you to realize that every individual can have this thing that Arthur Zines and others talk about being pervasive, part of pervasive leadership. So awareness-based systems change is literally empowering everyone to be a change maker. What's the way they're empowered to do that? If I could read you the emails that I get from people, because people just do it from our website, and then they write in, I can't tell you how this wheel of awareness has changed my life in the following ways. It is incredible. But it's credible because it's happening, but it's also credible when you understand that the wheel is just a metaphor. The hub is the plane of possibility, which drops people into the reality of this realm, and they learn to swim more effectively. It's like a person who does the breaststroke who only stays in the air realm, the equivalent of the Newtonian realm. How good a swimmer are you going to be if you're always with your neck like that? But look at a person doing the breaststroke who can go under and do all those strokes and then come up. So what you want to do is not hang out just in the plane of possibility. You don't have to move to a cave and just bliss out in the hub. Even though you can do that in the morning, sometimes it's great to do that for a while. But then you got to get, if you drive a car, and this is what I try to say to people at workshops, if you get in a car, you need to access your skills of driving the car, which are these plateaus. When you see a red light, you have to press on the brakes, which is a peak, right? You're going from a possible to an actual by pressing on the brakes. And I said, if you don't do that, if you just hang out in the plane of possibility, when you come to an intersection that's a red light, you will become one with everything. So So the notion of integration is that peaks are great, plateaus are great. You just don't want them to imprison you, either being chaotic or rigid. You want to have all three. You want to have access to the plane, access to plateaus, access to peaks. So that's like the shortest summary you'll ever get of an incredibly complex thing.
Thank you,
But I
Dan.
want to see if there are questions or anything.
Yes, I mean, I'm conscious of the time. We're a little bit past of the time, so I understand if people need to leave, but it would be great to hear if there are some questions, and if you have...
I have time, sure.
You do?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So then go ahead.
Yes, we do have one question from our fellow Luis Camargo, and he's asking, how is the vulnerability of entering and staying in the quantum space be addressed?
Yeah.
I believe this is a challenge in the work that forces a change in position.
Absolutely right. So let's take that really beautiful question and look at this graph. And this is the thing that's so interesting about the moment we're at to bring a connection between social change and science. So on this graph is a way to answer the question. The plane of possibility is maximal uncertainty. So many of us have a very low-lying plateau that creates an intention or state of mind or mood that says, the only way I get rewarded is to be certain. I got to be certain of my name. I got to be certain of my address. I got to be certain of a test answer. You know, everything in school, you know, reinforces that certainty is the way to go. So now you're asking me to go into uncertainty. What's wrong with you, right? So we need to realize that awareness-based systems change is to say, actually, dropping into the near zero plane of possibility is giving yourself permission to drop out of the plateau belief in a separate self and into the plain reality of our deep interconnected nature, where you can say, I don't know, where you can find yourself holding arms with people you've never met before because now you're a part of a process that is much bigger than your bodily defined self, which was a plateau before how you define yourself. When you do this with a bit of time to come to the question, people start realizing that when you live from the plane and learn from the plane and love from the plane and lead from the plane, you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to make things happen. You let them happen. That's a lot of L's. Living, learning, loving, leading, letting. So that way of living is really relaxing because you just look at another person, and one of the implications, we didn't say what they are, but one of the many implications of this proposal is that in each of the bodies that we have that we were born into is the capacity to access this plane of possibility. And because infinity is infinity, your plane, 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 all of our planes are the same. Infinity is infinity. So when you drop beneath peaks of self-identity and plateaus of attitude of separateness and self versus other, and you drop into your plane of possibility, you actually drop into a comfort with saying, I don't know, and I'm okay with that. And you drop into a place where you say, the word I is better replaced by the word me. There's a me that has a body, and a we that's my relationality with other people on the planet. And who I am is a we, M-W-E. So one of the things that I think we should do is actually create a we movement around this earth, where we have a word, so like in Spanish, yo nos, and I have now 12 languages where people, because I teach around the country, around the world, different countries, you know, people are sending in, how do you combine me and maintain some aspect of me, maintain we, and put it into one word. And when people, at the end of the wheel, you get to a we part of the wheel, people have expressed this incredible relief that they don't want to be just a me. It feels wrong. They don't want to be just a we, because they do have a personal identity and a life and a thing with their family and a body, and they should dream well and sleep well and eat well and exercise their body. That's a me, and you only get about 100 years, but you are much broader than your brain and bigger than your body. But you don't have to get rid of the we. So it isn't me to we. So the we thing allows you to do that. The we symbol, which comes back and goes into a concept. Oh, I see, I can be an integrated identity and a category that we are all in this together. So that's one way. The we allows us to become a plural verb rather than a singular noun. And that, if you think about it, in terms of Arab Spring and movements, so for my fellows that I have, they're always making hilarious words like, we get together for a weekend, and they write in, we're getting together for a weekend. Or when we're doing a research project, they go, we're doing a research project. And MW, they put it in whenever they can. And it's hilarious, but the feeling in the room when we start talking as we is completely different. Probably because this self-reinforcing, self-organizational thing of symbols is more impactful than we think, right? Because if you keep on saying I and them, and I'm, revising this textbook I wrote called The Developing Mind, and in science, they always talk about self-regulation, or even in mindfulness, self-compassion. And I've urged the self-compassion people to stop using that term because it reinforces self versus other. And they go, what should we use? And I said, use internal compassion and use intercompassion. Because that person born in a body that you weren't born into is you. And when you have compassion for them, it's just intercompassion. And when you're doing it for the body you're born into, it's intercompassion. Just use the skin as kind of a locus, location. So that's what we is a way of actually embracing the quantum nature that we are verbs. We are plural verbs. And then it becomes really fun. Because then you see, oh, I was nounifying myself. Sorry, I was lost in my noun. I thought I was a noun. I'm sorry about that. And you do these fun things, and you become much kinder to the whole thing.
Are there
Yes.
any other questions? Because if
Yeah, we have just one other question.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Carson.
Thank you.
We have one other question that says, by being in the plane of possibility, how can we influence what actualizes?
Exactly. I mean, this is a really, really beautiful question. And I think one way to answer it, because that would be, I'm going to do this 5-hour thing tomorrow that will be recorded, so you can get a copy of that from the people. I don't own it, but they're going to record it, but that might be fun. It's for clinicians, but it's exactly about that question. So the first simple way to say it is, the wheel of awareness allows you to differentiate hub from rim. That's the metaphor. That's the practice. The mechanism, if it's accurate, would be you learn to distinguish the plane from plateaus and peaks. Bless you. So that's, so that's the first step, is just to become aware. Oh, okay, I'm in a plateau, I'm in a peak. It's a belief I had. Okay, I drop into the plane. So you're basically learning to monitor what's going on and then to modify it by not getting lost on the rim, if you will, not getting lost in plateaus and peaks. That's the first thing. Second thing is, once you've learned to monitor with more stability and things become with more depth and focus and detail, by stabilizing this monitoring ability, now you can learn to modulate it by saying, oh, I see. I thought I was just Dan. I was nounifying myself right at that moment. I drop into the plane, and then suddenly, not just in my thoughts, but in my experience, I become aware of this whole different way of being. And then the task is to let other plateaus and peaks arise in that place of freedom. And this is the beautiful thing about the letting rather than making. So that so far, the experience has been, when you give people access to this plane of possibility, you don't have to teach them how to make new things. You're giving them the space. And this is the second incredible implication of the plane, is that plane of possibility is the source of other options. I mean, this is the weird thing about this proposal, is that it's not just a pause between impulse and action. It's not just awareness, which is absolutely fascinating why that would be, and all that's really interesting. But the third thing is, it's where the other options are. So when you learn the skill of dropping your mind, which basically means moving the energy probability position into the plane, and you can't say energy in the plane because in the plane there's no energy, it's potential energy. So to be really fair to the physicists, energy is above the plane, and the plane is potential energy. So that's why you hear me saying such clunky things like, I'm moving the probability energy position into, you know, but you have to talk like that or the physicists will kill you. So far, the physicists love this. I was teaching this in Ireland, and I had someone from the Max Planck Institute of Quantum Physics over there, and he goes, I need to talk to you. And one of the quick breaks at lunch, I talked to him, he goes, that's absolutely fabulous. It's so consistent with quantum physics. Yeah. So what this does then is it says, when you teach a person to drop into the hub, which is what you do every day if you do the wheel, you're dropping into the plane, fine. That's where the other options arise. And now it comes to the self-organizational piece. Self-organization is a natural emergent property of complex systems. So what you've done with your mind's subjective experience, consciousness, and information processing, the fourth facet is self-organization, is you're giving the self-organization permission to do what it does, which is to integrate. The way you optimize self-organization is with linking differentiated parts. So literally the word let, L-E-T, the letting of the plane of possibility is letting self-organization optimize complexity is what the word is, but anyway, it's integration, it's harmony, it's the flexibility, adaptability, coherence, energy, and stability. And this is what is so wild about it is, it's just teaching to differentiate hub from rim, accessing the plane, which is the hub, and then letting this stuff happen. Does that make sense? That was a crash course in the 3P
It's a lot. I mean, is there any? I have a question, but if there are any other questions, there.
No, we don't have any other.
Okay,
I have just one that
yes,
I
of
would
course.
love help, because one of the big challenges that we have as Ashokans is that we are in countries where system change is happening, where at times physical danger, you know, like at times you actually, you know, some people might, because we're changing systems, right? There is resistance from that system. So because you're in that space, sometimes you just don't have it, and you need to make some things happen.
Yeah.
I mean, or at least that's the belief. Then there's no time for this. So, you know,
No time for this as in doing a
as
meditation?
as in a practice, as in like, sometimes could sound a little bit too abstract. So then what would be your advice? You know, I'm in Venezuela, I'm in, you know, in a country, in Egypt, Colombia, right? Where like, you know, I am in such a chaotic system.
Yeah.
And I really want to drive system change. And my life might be even a danger, right? That I know that I need to create this social impact, right? That prioritizing doing a practice and actually doing my work are very, you know, I don't know what to choose. And then sometimes I just go into my work.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You know, this morning, before coming here, I went to a presentation for some philanthropists trying to do social entrepreneurship in China. And the presenter was a colleague who actually will be speaking at the meeting in April about just this thing. You know, it was about extreme exploration and going to all sorts of places where your life is in danger, just like you're describing. So this is not in conflict with that, because you sometimes you need to assess without getting lost in a plateau or peak of a particular opinion, and letting go of that and do what you need to do to keep your body alive. And say, this is not a time to be doing that, right? And it's when people don't do that, when they get lost just in their ideals, that sometimes negative things happen anyway. But that so this isn't in contradiction to that. Yeah, and unfortunately, you know, the world is full of all sorts of negative, non-intuitive to be aware of. So I would say that doesn't give you an answer to how to change those systems, but it gives you an answer to, I think, anyone in any condition, in this case we're talking about extreme exploration, you know, needs to make assessments where all these different factors are carried out, and then the natural choice can be made to pull back and not lose your life. Yeah.
Are there any other questions or last closing comments?
I hope it made sense to everyone out there.
Just want to say thank you very much indeed. It was hugely stimulating. Thanks so much.
My pleasure. Pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah.
You know, I would just
Thank
say
you.
that one thing you could do if you want to, if this information is interesting to you, the book Aware you could do as a book club, because it teaches you to do the wheel practice, and then it walks you step by step through what we covered as an overview today. And I think it would be enjoyable and also give you a vocabulary to discuss these ideas of awareness-based systems change.
Great.
Sorry, someone was going to say, yes.
Go ahead.
Luis, are you trying to turn your mute off? No. Oh.
No, Luis was asking about.
No, but I want to say thank you for everything.
Oh, thank you.
All right. In that case, thank you all
Thank you.
for being here, and to be continued.
Yes. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much.